You know that specific feeling you get when you're in a place designed for thousands of people, but you are the only one there? It is a heavy, almost pressurized kind of silence. I felt that every single night for 3 years. I worked the graveyard shift at a massive water park in Ohio called Neptune's Kingdom. Most people think working at a water park sounds fun, but at 3 a.m., when the pumps are humming low and the moonlight is reflecting off stagnant pools of chlorinated water, it is not fun. It is haunting. I was part of the maintenance crew, specifically the night operations. My job was to make sure the chemistry was balanced, the filters were clean, and the attractions were clear of debris for the morning opening. It was usually an easy gig. I listened to podcasts, walked the concrete paths, and enjoyed the solitude. I thought I knew every inch of that park. I thought I knew every dark corner and every hidden access tunnel. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday in early August, the peak of the humid Midwest summer. Even at night, the air was thick enough to chew on. I was sitting in the main control booth, enjoying the air conditioning, when a warning light started flashing on the master panel. It was a solid, angry red LED. It indicated a blockage on sensor 4 of the blackout. Now, let me explain the blackout. It was the park's crown jewel. It was a fully enclosed fiberglass tube slide that started 10 stories up and twisted for nearly 400 feet in total. Darkness before dumping you into a splash pool. It was designed to disorient you. Sensor 4 was located about halfway down the slide, right after a section we called the helix, which was a tight, spiraling loop. A blockage usually meant one thing: a raft had gotten stuck. Sometimes the air pressure in the tubes would fluctuate, or a kid would let go of the handles, and the raft would wedge itself against the sidewalls. It was a pain, but it was routine. I grabbed my radio, my heavy-duty maglite, and the keys to the tower. I radioed my supervisor, Dave, who was probably asleep in the office on the other side of the park. "Dave, I've got a red light on blackout. Going to clear it. Be back in 20. There was a crackle of static in Dave's groggy voice. "Copy. Watch your step." It rained earlier. Stairs might be slick. I walked across the deserted park. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of the highway and the crickets. The tower for the blackout loomed over everything like a skeletal giant. Climbing those stairs was a workout. 10 flights of open steel grating. As I climbed, the wind picked up, whistling through the support beams. By the time I reached the loading platform at the top, I was winded. I looked down. The park was a sprawling map of shadows. I unlocked the gate to the slide entrance. The mouth of the blackout was a gaping black hole. The water was turned off for the night, but there was always a residual trickle, a slime of algae and water that made the bottom slick. To clear a blockage, we had a specific protocol. I had to grab a maintenance mat, which is basically a thick foam sled slide down to the blockage, dislodge it, and then ride the rest of the way down. I sat on the mat, adjusted my heavy work boots, and pushed off. The transition was instant. 1 second I was under the stars. The next, I was in absolute, crushing darkness. The sound of the outside world vanished, replaced by the swoosh of the mat on plastic and the echo of my own breathing. I kept my flashlight off to save the battery, and because, honestly, seeing the scratched-up walls of the tube usually just made me claustrophobic. I counted the turns in my head to gauge my location. First drop, bank left, the long straightaway, then the helix. I felt the G-force press me against the side of the tube as I spiraled. I braced myself, knowing sensor 4 was just after this turn. I expected to bump into a rubber raft. I expected the squeak of inflated plastic. Instead, I hit something soft and heavy. The impact was violent. It wasn't like hitting a bouncy raft. It was like hitting a pile of wet sandbags. I came to a jarring, dead stop. I flew forward off the mat, slamming my shoulder against the curve of the pipe. I lay there for a second, stunned, the wind knocked out of me. The silence returned instantly. I groaned, rolling onto my back. The air in the tube was hot and smelled terrible. It didn't smell like chlorine. It smelled like rotting garbage and unwashed skin. My hand fumbled for the flashlight on my belt. I clicked it on. The beam cut through the humid darkness, illuminating the blockage. It wasn't a raft. About 6 feet in front of me, completely blocking the 4-foot-wide tube, was a barricade. It was constructed of hundreds of park towels, wadded together and packed tight. Mixed in with the towels were trash bags, pieces of foam padding, and driftwood. It was a nest, a literal dam built inside the slide. My brain couldn't process it. I thought maybe some pranksters had broken in and done this. I sat up, rubbing my shoulder. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice echoing weirdly down the pipe. I started to scoot forward, intending to kick the pile apart so I could slide past. I was angry now. This was going to take forever to clean up. I got within arm's reach of the pile when the towels shifted. A hand shot out from the center of the debris. I scrambled back, my boots slipping on the slime. The pile of trash groaned and heaved, falling apart as someone sat up from the middle of it. It was a man, but he didn't look like any person I had ever seen. He was ghostly pale, his skin a translucent gray color from lack of sun. He was skeletal, his ribs showing clearly through his tattered, wet t-shirt. His hair was long, matted, and dripping wet. He looked like something that had been dredged up from a swamp. He blinked in the harsh light of my flashlight, shielding his eyes with a trembling hand. He didn't look terrified. He looked furious. "Turn it off," he rasped. His voice was like grinding stones, dry and unused. "Turn the light off." I was paralyzed. I was a big guy, 6'2", but the sheer insanity of the situation froze me. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer. "You can't be in here. You need to get out." The man uncoiled his legs. He was tall, incredibly lanky. He shifted his weight, and I saw something glint in his right hand. It was a screwdriver, but not a normal tool. The metal shaft had been ground down against concrete until it was a needle-thin shank. "This is mine," he hissed, gesturing to the tube around us. "My home. Go back." "I can't go back," I yelled, panic finally setting in. "It's too steep. I have to go down. Just let me pass, man. I won't call the cops. Just let me go." I was lying. I was absolutely going to call the cops, but I needed to get past him. The tube was too narrow to fight in. If he stabbed me here, I would bleed out in the dark, and no one would find me until morning. The man stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He seemed to be weighing his options. Then, without a word, he lunged. He moved with the speed of a feral animal. He scrambled up the curved side of the pipe, using the friction of his bare feet, and slashed the screwdriver at my face. I threw my arm up. The metal tip tore through the sleeve of my work shirt and sliced a long gash into my forearm. The pain was sharp and hot. Adrenaline exploded in my system. I kicked out with both legs, my heavy boots connecting with his chest. He grunted, sliding backward into his nest of towels. "Get out!" He screamed. A high-pitched, wailing sound that made my blood run cold. I knew I couldn't retreat. Climbing up 10 stories of slick plastic in the dark was impossible. My only exit was through him. I made a split-second decision. I pulled my knees to my chest and launched myself forward, turning my body into a battering ram. I hit him hard. We tangled together, a mess of limbs, trash, and wet towels. The smell of him was overpowering ammonia and decay. He bit my shoulder, his teeth sinking in deep. I roared and smashed the heavy flashlight into the side of his head. He went limp for a second, his grip loosening. The momentum of our struggle dislodged the main bulk of the gown. Gravity took over. We began to slide. It was a nightmare ride. We were tumbling down the pitch-black tube at 30 miles an hour, locked in a death grip. I couldn't see anything. I just felt impacts, his elbow in my ribs, my knee in his stomach, the hard plastic slamming against my spine. I tried to push him away, but he was clinging to me like a drowning man. We hit the final drop. The tube angled sharply downward. We fell, weightless for a second, and then boom, we hit the splash pool. The cold water was a shock. I went under, swallowing a mouthful of chlorinated water. I thrashed, kicking wildly to get away from him. I broke the surface, gasping for air. I scrambled for the pool's edge, hauling myself out onto the concrete deck, coughing and spitting. I spun around, scanning the water. I held the flashlight up like a club, ready to smash his skull if he came at me again. The water in the splash pool rippled and settled. Bubbles rose to the surface. I waited 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30, nothing. I ran to the emergency phone on the wall and dialed the security office. Dave, call the police, now. There's a guy in the slide. The police arrived in under 10 minutes. They drained the splash pool. They sent a K-9 unit up the tower. They dismantled the nest of towels and trash. They found wrappers from food sold at the concession stands. They found a stash of stolen wallets and watches. They found the sharpened screwdriver at the bottom of the pool. But they never found the man. It was impossible. I was watching the water the entire time. There is no other exit from that pool. He didn't come up for air. He just vanished. The police assumed he had slipped out while I was running to the phone, but I know he didn't. I would have seen him. The investigation went on for weeks, but eventually it went cold. I quit the next day. I couldn't step foot in that park again. But here is the detail that the news didn't report. A week later, during a deep inspection of the slide structure, maintenance found something. About 20 feet up from the splash pool, in a section of the tube that is totally dark, there was a seam in the fiberglass that didn't look right. They pushed on it. It was a hatch. Someone had carefully cut a section of the slide out and attached hinges to the outside. It opened into the hollow support column of the tower. Inside that column, they found a sleeping bag, a bucket for waste, and a peephole drilled through the plastic. The peephole faced directly into the women's shower facility window, which was adjacent to the slide tower. He hadn't just been sleeping in the slide that one night. He had been living in the walls of the Waterpark for months. He would crawl out into the tube at night to sleep, and during the day, he was inside the columns watching. And the scariest part? The hatch was open. He didn't drown in the pool. He swam underwater, back up into the tube, opened his secret door, and disappeared into the framework of the park while I was standing on the deck calling for help. He could still be in there, or in another park. So next time you're on a slide and you hear a hollow thump beneath you, just pray it's just the pipes settling. There is a specific kind of curiosity that only hits you when you are 17 years old and bored out of your mind. It's that urge to go where you aren't supposed to go, to see things that have been left behind. We called it urban exploration, but really, it was just trespassing. My name is Mark. This happened about 10 years ago, back when I was a senior in high school. My best friends, Kyle and Sarah, and I were obsessed with finding new skate spots. We had exhausted every parking garage and loading dock in our town. So when Kyle heard that Wild Waters, the huge outdoor water park 2 towns over, had been shut down for the season and the security was practically non-existent, we knew what we were doing that Saturday. It was mid-November. The sky was that relentless, flat gray you get before the first snow. The air was biting cold. We parked my beat-up Honda Civic in the woods, bordering the park, and hiked a mile through the brush. The plan was simple. Hop the fence, skate the empty concrete bowls of the wave pool and the lazy river, drink a few stolen beers, and get out before sunset. Getting in was laughably easy. A section of the chain-link fence had been peeled back, probably by deer or other kids. We slipped through and stood on the perimeter path. If you've never been to a water park in the winter, let me tell you, it is an alien landscape. Without the screaming kids, the splashing water, and the bright sunshine, it looks like a graveyard. The slides rose up like bleached dinosaur bones. The concession stands were boarded up with plywood. Dead leaves were everywhere, drifting in piles against the concrete. "It's so quiet," Sarah whispered. She was right. The silence was absolute. It felt heavy, like the park was holding its breath. We skated the kiddie pool first. It was dry and filled with pine needles, but the transition was smooth. We spent an hour there, laughing and filming each other. It felt like harmless fun. Then Kyle got restless. "Let's go check out the Tsunami," he said. The Tsunami was the park's massive wave pool. It was legendary for having 12-foot walls at the deep end. We packed up our boards and walked toward the far end of the park. As we got closer, the smell hit us. It was a thick, organic stench like wet earth, rotting vegetation, and something coppery. "Gross," I muttered, pulling my jacket collar up over my nose. We rounded the corner and stopped. We were expecting an empty concrete basin. What we found was a black lake. The wave pool hadn't been drained. It was about half full of dark, stagnant rainwater, and whatever leftover pool water had been festering there since September. The water was opaque, black as ink, with a layer of yellow sludge floating on top. "Well, that sucks," Kyle said, kicking a pebble into the water. It made a thick plop sound. "Can't skate that?" "Let's just go," Sarah said, shivering. "This place is giving me the creeps. It feels wrong." "Wait," Kyle said, squinting. He pointed toward the deep end, near the back wall where the massive wave-generating machinery was housed behind grates. "What is that?" I followed his finger. Floating in the middle of the black water, about 20 yards out, was a bundle. It looked like a pile of rags, maybe a coat or a blanket. "Is that a person?" Sarah's voice trembled. "I don't know," Kyle said. He looked around and found a long, sturdy branch that had fallen from an oak tree. "I'm gonna check." "Kyle, don't," I warned. "Seriously, let's just leave. It's probably just trash." Kyle didn't listen. He was the fearless one, the idiot. He walked down the concrete slope until the black water was lapping at the soles of his Vans. He reached out with the stick, straining to reach the floating object. He poked it. The object bobbed and slowly rolled over. It wasn't a coat. It was a deer. Or rather, the front half of a deer. The animal had been severed at the waist. But it wasn't a clean cut like a butcher would make. It was jagged, torn. Ribs were sticking out, white against the red meat. "Oh my God!" Sarah screamed, backing away. Kyle dropped the stick and scrambled backward, his face pale. Jesus, something ate it. Something ripped it apart. That's when we heard the sound. A clunk. It was a heavy, mechanical sound, like a giant breaker switch being thrown. It echoed off the concrete walls of the pool. Then, a low, electrical hum began to vibrate through the ground beneath our feet. "What did you do?" I yelled at Kyle. "I didn't touch anything." He shouted back. The water in the pool began to shift. It wasn't draining. It was moving. A current was forming, pulling everything toward the deep end wall. The wave generators. Someone had turned the power on. "Someone's here," Sarah whispered, terrified. "We need to run." We turned to bolt back toward the fence, but a new sound stopped us dead. It wasn't the rhythmic whoosh of waves. It was a grinding, metallic screeching, like metal shearing on metal. I looked back at the pool. The water was churning violently now. And then I saw the source of the noise. The massive steel grate that covered the intake tunnels, the tunnels that sucked the water in to create the waves, was being pushed open from the inside. The bolts snapped with loud pops. The heavy grate fell into the water with a splash. And then something pulled itself out of the tunnel. At first, my brain tried to tell me it was a man in a wetsuit. It was roughly the size of a man, but the way it moved was wrong. It didn't climb. It slithered. It pulled itself up onto the concrete ledge using arms that were too long, with joints that seemed to bend backward. Its skin was pale and slick, like the belly of a fish. It stood up, water cascading off its hairless body. It turned its head toward us. It didn't have a face. Not really. It had a smooth, domed head with no eyes, just two slits where a nose should be, and a mouth that was a vertical gash. It opened its mouth, and I saw rows of serrated teeth like a shark. It let out a sound that I will never forget. It was a wet, clicking hiss. "Run!" I screamed. I didn't wait for them. I turned and sprinted harder than I ever had in my life. We tore through the park. I could hear Kyle and Sarah gasping for breath behind me. I could hear the wet slap of that thing's feet hitting the pavement. It was chasing us. We reached the fence. I practically threw Sarah over the top. Kyle scrambled up next. I risked a glance back. The thing was fast. It was on all fours now, galloping like a distorted dog, closing the distance. It was only 50 yards away. I vaulted the fence, tearing my jeans and slicing my palm on the rusty wire. We didn't stop. We sprinted through the woods, crashing through thorn bushes, not caring about the noise. We reached my car, and I fumbled with the keys, dropping them in the leaves. "Get in! Get in!" Kyle screamed, watching the tree line. I found the keys, jammed them into the lock, and we dove inside. I cranked the engine and peeled out, dirt and gravel spraying everywhere. As we sped away, Sarah was sobbing in the back seat. "Did you see him?" she asked, her voice broken. "See what? The monster?" Kyle asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "No," she said. "The man. In the lifeguard tower." I looked at her in the rearview mirror. "What man?" "When the machine turned on," she stammered. I looked up at the main tower overlooking the wave pool. There was a man standing in the window. He was wearing a yellow park raincoat. He was holding a remote control. The car went silent. "He was watching us," Sarah continued. "He wasn't scared. He pointed at us. He pointed for that thing to go after us. We never went back. We never told the police because we were trespassing, and frankly, who would believe us? Teenagers on drugs seeing monsters? But I did some research a few years later. That water park closed permanently the following spring. The official reason was bankruptcy, but I dug deeper into the local archives. In the 5 years before it closed, 4 people had gone missing in that park. 2 were homeless men who slept in the woods nearby. 2 were seasonal employees. They were never found. I don't think the park closed because of money. I think the owners knew what was living in the filtration tunnels beneath the wave pool. I think they were trying to keep it contained. Or worse, I think they were feeding it. And that day, we were just the next scheduled meal. We have this assumption that privacy is a guarantee. We believe that when we lock a door, when we step into a changing stall, or when we stand in front of a mirror in a restroom, we are alone. We think the walls around us are solid barriers between us and the rest of the world. I used to believe that too. I used to think that the feeling of being watched was just paranoia, a trick of the mind played by an overactive imagination. I learned the hard way that sometimes that feeling is not a trick. It is an instinct, a survival mechanism trying to warn you that the walls are not solid and you are never, ever truly alone. My name is Emily. This story goes back to the summer of 2014. I was 19 years old, home from my sophomore year of college, and I was desperate for cash. My tuition was going up, and my parents had made it clear that my living expenses were my responsibility. I needed a job that paid above minimum wage, and in my coastal Florida town, that meant tourism. I landed a seasonal contract at Sunsplash, which was the largest water park in the county. Now, when you picture working at a water park, you probably picture being a lifeguard. You imagine sitting in a high chair, twirling a whistle, getting a tan, and flirting with other staff members. That was the dream. That was not my reality. I wasn't certified for rescue, and I wasn't a strong enough swimmer. I was hired for facilities and sanitation. In plain English, I was a janitor. My kingdom was the women's main locker room. And let me paint a picture of this place for you, because the layout is important. This wasn't a small gym locker room. This building was a massive concrete bunker designed to handle thousands of tourists a day. It was cavernous. The ceilings were 20 feet high, echoing with the constant sounds of slamming metal doors, screaming children, and rushing water. The air was permanently thick with a suffocating mixture of humidity, coconut sunscreen, industrial bleach, and that distinct wet dog smell of damp swimwear. My station was a small supply closet near the entrance. I spent 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, restocking toilet paper, unclogging toilets, mopping up puddles of questionable water, and wiping down the vanity area. The vanity area was the centerpiece of the room. It was a long counter running almost 40 feet along the back wall, lined with sinks. Above the sinks was a mirror. It was a massive, seamless sheet of glass that stretched from one end of the counter to the other. It was huge. At any given moment, there would be 20 women standing there, fixing their hair, reapplying waterproof mascara, adjusting their bikini tops, checking their sunburns. It was the one place in the park where people stopped moving and looked at themselves. For the first month, the job was just physically exhausting. I was invisible. People don't look at the janitor. They step around you like you are a wet floor sign. But around mid-July, the exhaustion started to turn into something else. It started to turn into dread. It began with the noises. The locker room was never quiet. It was a cacophony of echoes. But I started noticing sounds that didn't fit the rhythm of the room. I would be mopping the floor late in the afternoon, around 5:30 p.m. The park closed at 6 o'clock, so the crowds were thinning out. The screaming kids were gone. It was mostly just stragglers showering off before the drive home. I would be standing near the sinks, wringing out my mop, and I would hear a sound coming from the wall in front of me. The wall with the mirror. It was a dull thud, like a heavy book being dropped on a carpeted floor. The first time it happened, I paused and looked at the mirror. I saw my own tired reflection, the smudged glass, and the tile wall behind me. I assumed it was the plumbing. The building was 30 years old. The pipes knocked and groaned all the time. I brushed it off, but then the sounds got more specific. 2 days later, I was cleaning a smudge of lipstick off the glass. My face was inches from the mirror. Suddenly, I heard a cough. It wasn't a loud, hacking cough. It was a suppressed, wet cough. A stifled sound, like someone trying to clear their throat without being heard. And it came from directly behind the glass. I jumped back, my heart hammering a sudden rhythm against my ribs. I looked around the room. There was no one near me. The closest person was a woman blow-drying her hair 30 feet away. She couldn't have made that sound. I walked around to the side of the vanity wall. It was flush against the concrete structure of the building. There was no hallway there. No door, just solid block. I told myself I was losing it. I told myself it was the ventilation ducts carrying sound from the men's room on the other side of the building. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched grew intense. You know that sensation? The prickling of the fine hairs on your arms? The way your skin tightens? I felt it every time I turned my back to that mirror. I felt like I was on a stage, performing for an audience I couldn't see. I decided to bring it up to my supervisor. His name was Greg. Greg was a fixture at the park. He was the facilities manager, a man in his mid-40s who always looked like he had just run a mile. He was constantly sweating. He had greasy, thinning hair and a nervous, gummy smile that made my skin crawl. He was the kind of guy who stood a little too close when he talked to you, whose eyes lingered on your chest for a second too long before snapping up to your face. I found him in the break room, eating a sandwich. "Hey, Greg," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "I have a weird question about the locker room." He chewed slowly, looking me up and down. "What's up, Emily? Someone clogged a toilet again?" "No," I said. "It's the walls. The back wall with the mirrors. Is there anything behind there? Like a utility chase or a pipe room?" Greg stopped chewing. For a split second, his eyes went flat, totally devoid of emotion. Then, the nervous smile snapped back into place. "Just plumbing access," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's a crawl space for the water lines." "Why?" "I keep hearing noises," I said. "Like people moving around. And coughing." Greg laughed. It was a loud, forced sound. "Rats," he said. "We got a problem with roof rats getting into the crawl spaces. Big suckers. They make a lot of noise. I'll put some traps down. Don't worry about it." He took a bite of his sandwich, signaling the conversation was over. I wanted to believe him. I really did. Rats made sense. Rats explained the scuffling sounds. But rats didn't cough. And rats didn't make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in early August. It was a late, close night, meaning the park stayed open until 9 p.m. for a special event. By 9:30 p.m., the guests were gone. The music was turned off. The park was silent, except for the distant, rhythmic chug-chug of the filtration pumps. My job was to do the deep clean. I had to scrub every inch of that locker room, so it was sparkling for the morning. I was the only person in the building. I locked the main doors from the inside standard protocol for safety and put my headphones in. I was blasting music, trying to distract myself from the creepy silence of the place. I worked my way through the showers, bleaching the tile, and moved to the vanity. I took my spray bottle of glass cleaner and a roll of paper towels. I started at the far left of the massive mirror and worked my way down. Spray, wipe, spray, wipe. I was zoning out, thinking about my tuition payments, about how tired I was. I reached the center of the mirror. I sprayed the glass and leaned in to wipe away a stubborn spot of hairspray. That's when I saw it. Because I was leaning in so close, my face was only an inch from the surface. The bright fluorescent lights above me were reflecting harsh and white. I noticed a defect in the installation. At the very bottom edge of the mirror, where the glass met the metal backsplash, the caulking had peeled away slightly. There was a tiny gap, maybe 1/8 of an inch wide. And through that gap, I didn't see darkness. I didn't see the concrete block of a wall. I saw light. It was dim, warm, yellow light, like the glow of a lamp. My hand froze on the glass. My breath hitched in my throat. I pulled my headphones out, letting them hang around my neck. The silence of the room crashed in on me. I leaned down, pressing my cheek against the cold counter, and squinted through the tiny crack. It wasn't a crawl space. It was a room. I could see a sliver of a floor. It was covered in a rug. A rug? Why would a plumbing crawl space have a rug? I stood up, my heart racing so fast it made me dizzy. I looked at my own reflection. I looked at the dark circles under my eyes, my messy ponytail, my sunsplash uniform. And then I remembered something. A stupid internet fact I had read years ago on a crime blog. A way to test a mirror. The fingernail test. I told myself I was being crazy. I told myself I was tired. But my hand moved on its own. I raised my index finger and pressed the tip of my nail against the surface of the glass, right at eye level. If a mirror is a standard mirror, the reflective silver is painted on the back of the glass pane. So if you touch it, there will be a gap between your finger and the reflection. The gap is the thickness of the glass itself. Gap equals good. But if it is a two-way mirror, the reflective coating is on the front surface. There is no glass between you and the reflection. I pressed my nail against the glass. There was no gap. My fingertip touched its reflection directly, point to point. No space, no glass. The world seemed to tilt sideways. The air left the room. I wasn't looking at a mirror. I was looking at a window. A window that I had changed my clothes in front of. A window that thousands of women and little girls had stood in front of all summer. And if I could see light coming from the other side, that meant someone was in there. Right now. A wave of nausea hit me so hard, I almost doubled over. I backed away from the mirror, my feet scuffling on the tile. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat had closed up. I stared at the glass, waiting for it to shatter, waiting for a face to appear. Then I heard it. From behind the glass, inches from where I had just been standing, came a sound. It was the distinct, undeniable sound of a chair shifting. Someone shifting their weight. Someone who had been sitting perfectly still, watching me test the glass, and had now reacted. That broke the paralysis. I dropped the spray bottle. It hit the floor with a loud crack, chemical cleaner splashing over my boots. I didn't care. I turned and ran. I fumbled with the lock on the main door, my hands shaking so badly, I dropped my keys. I scooped them up, jammed the key in, and burst out into the humid night air. I didn't stop running until I reached the security dispatch building near the front gate. I burst through the door, startling the night dispatcher, a guy named Miller. Miller was a good guy. He was a retired state trooper, gray-haired, no nonsense, built like a fire hydrant. He looked up from his monitor, saw my face, and stood up immediately. "Emily, what is it? What happened?" I was hyperventilating. I couldn't get the words out. I just pointed back toward the locker rooms. "The mirror," I gasped. "The mirror. It's a window. There's someone inside the wall." Miller didn't laugh. He didn't ask if I was sure. He saw the terror in my eyes, and his cop instincts took over. He grabbed his radio and his heavy maglite flashlight. "Stay here," he ordered. "No," I said, grabbing his sleeve. "I'm not staying alone. I'm coming with you." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, stay behind me. Do not make a sound." We walked back through the dark park. The towering water slides looked like monsters in the moonlight. We didn't go to the main entrance of the locker room. Miller walked around the perimeter of the building, shining his light on the concrete walls. We found it on the south side of the structure. There was a steel door. It was painted the same beige as the concrete to blend in. It had a sign on it: "Danger high voltage, authorized personnel only." I had walked past this door every day. I assumed it was the electrical room. Miller tried the handle. Locked. He pulled out his master key ring, a huge ring with 50 keys on it. He cycled through them, his hands steady. He found a small brass key. He slid it into the lock. It turned. Miller drew his baton. He wasn't allowed to carry a gun on park property, and kicked the door open. He shouted, "Security! Come out with your hands up." He swept the flashlight beam into the darkness. No one came out. We stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was vile. It smelled of stale sweat, rotting fast food, ammonia, and something musky and biological. Miller found a light switch and flipped it. I gasped, my hands flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. It wasn't a utility room. It was a corridor. A narrow, purpose-built hallway that ran the entire length of the locker room wall. It was about 4 feet wide. On the left side was the concrete exterior wall. On the right side was the glass. From this side, it wasn't a mirror. It was a long tinted window. We could see into the locker room perfectly. It was brightly lit. We could see the spray bottle I had dropped. We could see the sinks. We could see the reflection of the showers in the mirrors on the opposite wall. It was a panoramic view of everything, but the room itself was what made my blood run cold. It was set up like a living room. There was a filthy mattress on the floor in the corner, tangled with gray sheets. There was a mini fridge humming in the silence. There were stacks of pizza boxes, empty soda bottles, and a bucket that was clearly being used as a toilet. And there were chairs. Directly in front of the glass, positioned at different heights, were 3 folding camping chairs. They were arranged like theater seats. On a small folding table in front of the center chair, there was a camera on a tripod, and next to it, a stack of spiral-bound notebooks. Miller moved forward, his face grim. He didn't touch anything yet. He was scanning for a person, but the room was empty. There was a back door at the far end of the corridor, slightly ajar. They had fled when I ran for help. I walked toward the table, drawn by a morbid, horrific curiosity. I looked at the notebooks. They were logs. I read the page that was open. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. August 12th, 4 p.m. The mother in the red suit is back. Use camera 2. August 12th, 4:15 p.m. Girl in the blue bikini. Locker 45. Zoom in. And then, near the bottom of the page, the ink still fresh. August 12th, 9:40 p.m. Emily is cleaning. She looks sad today. She is leaning in close. She sees us. She sees us go. Go now. Oh my God, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. They were here. They were watching me read the glass. Miller was looking at something else. Hanging on a hook near the mattress was a uniform shirt, a bright yellow sunsplash polo. He turned it around. The name tag on the front read, Greg, the facilities manager. My boss, the man who told me it was just rats. He had been living in there, or at least spending his nights there. Miller radioed the police. Dispatch, get the sheriff here. Now, We have a massive voyeurism setup. I need the building surrounded. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights and police tape. They found Greg an hour later. He was trying to leave the park through a maintenance gate. He had a backpack full of hard drives. He was arrested and charged with voyeurism, video voyeurism, and about a dozen other things. It was a massive scandal. The park nearly closed down. But that's not the end of the story. That's not the part that keeps me awake at night. The police analyzed the room. They went through the evidence. Greg confessed. He cried, he begged, he claimed he was sick. He took the plea deal. But there was a problem with the evidence. The notebooks. When the forensics team analyzed the handwriting in the logs, they found two distinct styles. One was Greg's messy, jagged, pressed hard into the paper. The other was different. It was small, neat, precise, almost elegant. And then there were the chairs. There were 3 chairs set up in front of the glass. Greg admitted to being there. He admitted to the camera. But when the detectives asked him about the other 2 chairs and the other handwriting, he clammed up. He got terrified. He swore up and down that he worked alone. He refused to give a name. He refused to explain the 3rd chair. He went to prison protecting someone. They never found the other people. There were no fingerprints that matched anyone in the system. The second exit door led out into the woods behind the park, and the trail went cold. I quit the next day. I moved out of state. I haven't stepped foot in a water park since. But the damage is done. Every time I go into a public bathroom, every time I go into a changing room at a department store, every time I stay in a hotel room with a large mirror facing the bed, I can't help myself. I walk up to the glass. I raise my hand, and I press my fingernail against the surface. You would be horrified to know how often there is no gap. You think you are alone. You think the door is locked and you are safe. But you need to ask yourself, who is sitting in the dark on the other side of the wall, holding a pen, waiting for you to get undressed? Check your mirrors. Please, just check. And that's all for tonight. Remember, the most terrifying monsters are the ones that look just like us. The ones who might even live right next door. If these stories serve as a good reminder to trust your instincts, then show your support and like and subscribe. Hitting that bell means you'll get a warning before the next nightmare begins. Sleep well, if you can.